6 people. Different countries. Never met each other. They all remember the same building, in identical detail. The corridor. The diagonal crack in the concrete above the entrance. The broken light on the 2nd floor. The smell of something faintly sweet inside. A building that doesn't exist anywhere in the world. When the researcher who discovered this showed a drawing made by one of them to the other 5, nobody spoke for almost a minute. Then one of them said something that was never forgotten. I put my hand on the door at the end of the corridor. It was warm, like there was someone on the other side. This is what you're about to hear. In October of 2021, Daniela Vaz posted a simple question to a forum dedicated to unexplained experiences. She was a doctoral candidate in cognitive psychology at the University of Freiburg, Germany, researching how the human brain constructs memories of places that never existed. The question was an exercise, a side project. She told colleagues it would amount to nothing. It did. Within 72 hours, more than 400 people had responded. Most were exactly what she expected. Dreamers, people confusing memories with films, with books, with places they might have visited once and forgotten. But among those responses were 6 she couldn't fit into any category. 6 people describing the same place. Not similar. The same. Daniela began calling them, one by one. She recorded everything. And the more she listened, the less she could sleep. Marcus was 34 and lived in Portland, Oregon. He worked as a night security guard at a logistics warehouse. The kind of person who only believes in what he can measure, skeptical by nature, uncomfortable with anything that didn't have a practical explanation. He brought it up, almost apologetically. The memory surfaced for the first time when he was in his mid-20s, during a period of insomnia. It wasn't exactly a dream, more like a film clip that played without warning, eating breakfast, staring at the ceiling, and suddenly he was there. 3 or 4 seconds. Always the same place, always the same time within the memory. Late afternoon, that yellow-gray light of the last 20 minutes before the sky gives up entirely. He was walking down a side street. The asphalt was old, patched so many times the surface looked like a quilt of different shades of gray. On his left, low commercial buildings, the kind that were once warehouses, then auto repair shops, then nothing identifiable. Small windows set high, the kind that don't let anyone see in or out. No signage he could read. A laundromat, closed, the neon sign dead in the window. A chain-link fence with a tarp bungee corded to it. And no cars. At no point were there any cars. At a corner he always knew to turn at, without knowing why. The building appeared. 4 or 5 floors, set slightly back from the pavement, with that faded cream color that residential buildings from the 60s acquire after decades without renovation. A concrete overhang above the entrance, with a diagonal crack cutting across it from one corner to the other. The door was always unlocked. Inside smelled like damp newspaper, and beneath that, something almost sweet, like overripe fruit, but not quite. The stairwell was immediately to the left. The light above the 2nd floor landing was out. Not flickering, just on up to a point, and then, for steps from the top, completely dark. Marcus said he always paused there, not from fear, from something closer to recognition. He never knew what he had gone there to do, only that he was going back. Agnieszka was 29 and lived in Gdansk, Poland. She had studied architecture before dropping out to work at her family's bakery. The kind of person who pays attention to buildings the way others pay attention to people. Proportions, construction logic, the relationship between windows and floors. The memory came for the first time when she was 17, on a long train journey across Poland, staring out the window at nothing. It arrived complete, like a file downloaded all at once. In her version, it was morning. Not clear, decisive morning. The pale, uncertain kind that hasn't yet decided which way it'll go. She was on a longer street, with a tram track running down its center, slightly raised above the pavement and stained orange-brown with rust. On one side, low apartments of Soviet geometry. On the other, a small park, really just a gap between buildings, with 3 benches and 2 trees pruned so aggressively they looked like clenched fists. She walked for several minutes, past a butcher's shop with brown paper in the window, a pharmacy with a green cross, one segment of the LED darker than the others. There was a smell of something baking, but when she looked for its source, she couldn't find it. Then she entered a gap between 2 buildings that she somehow understood was a passage, not a dead end. The corridor was about 3 meters wide, with pipe infrastructure running along one wall and a drain in the center of the floor that produced a low hum she felt more in her body than heard. The passage opened onto a small courtyard, and there, set back, cream-colored, 4 or 5 floors, was the building. The broken light on the 2nd floor. The smell when she entered, and the certainty, walking toward the door, that she had been there before. Not in this memory, before it. In some earlier memory she could no longer access. Joel was 52 and lived in Birmingham, England. A former social worker, retired on medical grounds after a back injury. Methodical, somewhat formal in how he communicated, and deeply uncomfortable discussing the memory. Not because it frightened him, he said, but because it embarrassed him professionally. He had spent 30 years helping other people apply rational frameworks to irrational situations. Being on the other side wasn't easy. He said he had assumed it was an amalgamation, the brain stitching together fragments of real places he'd visited during years of home welfare checks. He had been inside hundreds of buildings. It made sense that they would blur. But the more he described it, the more precise it became. In his memory, it was raining, a fine, persistent drizzle that made everything slightly reflective. He approached the building from a different direction than the others. The street was residential, terraced houses behind low walls. At the end of the street, a corner shop with a hand-painted sign he could never read clearly. Beside it, an alley. He took the alley. It smelled of cold stone and something metallic. His footsteps sounded different there, shorter, more contained, as if the acoustics of the space compressed his presence. At the end of the alley, he turned left, crossed a narrow road, and the building was directly opposite. Always the same crossing. A pedestrian marking on the road, almost entirely worn away. The crack in the overhang. Inside was where it became strange for him, because the interior didn't match what the exterior suggested. From the outside, the building looked like it might have 8 or 10 flats per floor, standard post-war residential construction. But the corridor seemed too long. Not dramatically, just slightly. Not enough that you'd point at it and say something was wrong. Just enough that by the time you reached the far end, you were aware that something was off. Joel had never reached the door at the end. None of them had, except one. Priya was 41 and lived in Sao Paulo. A translator of technical and legal documents. Precise with language the way Agnieszka was precise with architecture. In her interviews with Daniela, she constantly corrected herself, discarding adjectives she felt were too vague. Her path was the most ordinary of all, and that was exactly what unsettled her. In her memory, it was midday, hot, a wide commercial road, the kind that exists in every large city solely to carry people and noise with complete indifference to whoever passes through. There were shops, a pharmacy, she said, a laundromat, closed. She noticed these things peripherally, the way you notice them when you're already thinking about where you're going. She turned down a smaller street without knowing why. It felt habitual. Then turned again. Each turn reduced the noise of the city by half, she said. After the third turn, there was almost silence. Not real silence. A reduced version of the city, as if someone had slowly turned the volume down. The building was at the end of this reduced street. Same cream facade. Same overhang. Same crack. She noted that the crack was diagonal, starting from the upper left corner and running down toward the center right. She had measured it with her eye. Roughly 45 degrees. Later, when the six compared details, that angle would matter. Inside, she climbed the stairs. The broken light on the second floor. The corridor. She went further than any of them remembered going, all the way to the door at the end. But she didn't open it. She couldn't say why. Ryan was 23 and lived in Melbourne. A graphic design student. The most reluctant to participate. He had responded to Daniela's post somewhere between a joke and a confession. This is weird, and I'm probably not the only one who's going to say this. He was the only one who had drawn it. He said he'd sketched the building from memory about a dozen times over the past 2 years. Different scales, different perspectives. He'd been trying to use it as reference for a thesis project, a fictional city he was building. He thought it was just a building his brain had assembled from things he'd seen. A prop in his imagination. In his memory, it was evening. That dusk that has already made up its mind. He approached the building from the front, walking directly down a short road that terminated in a small square. Not a proper plaza, just a widening of the pavement with a single dead tree in the center, its trunk wrapped in gray bark that had begun to peel away in vertical strips. The building was directly across from the tree. The crack in the overhang was the first thing he always noticed. He had drawn it many times. 45 degrees, starting from the upper left corner. He uploaded the sketches to Daniela. She sent them to the others before their next group call. The call lasted 4 hours. Nobody spoke for the first 40 seconds. Cora was 67 and lived in Vancouver. A librarian for 38 years. The calmest of all of them, and the one who had lived with the memory the longest. She said she first remembered the building in her mid-20s, which placed the origin somewhere in the early 1980s. She had thought about it her entire adult life. Her path was the longest. A residential neighborhood at the edge of some city she could never identify. Houses with small gardens, a school glimpse between buildings, a postbox at a corner. The scale of everything was slightly smaller than she would have expected from cities she knew. As if someone had built a city at 90%, and once you were inside you couldn't point to what was wrong, but something deep in your body understood. She found the building the way you find something you've already decided will be there. She went inside, climbed the stairs, the broken light, the corridor, and she did reach the door. Not once, many times, but she always stopped, always stood in front of it, always placed one hand flat against the wood. She described it as painted white, slightly grimy at the edges where hands had touched it repeatedly over many years, and she always felt, through her palm, that there was warmth on the other side. Not the heat of a furnace, the warmth of a presence. As if the room on the other side was occupied. When Daniela compiled the testimonies, she built what she called a consensus architecture, a single description that honored every account and contradicted none. 4 floors, possibly 5 if you included a partial upper level that some participants sensed rather than saw. Rendered exterior, painted cream, weathered unevenly, several coats laid over several decades. Windows with wooden frames, most with translucent rather than clear glass. No lights visible in any window. The overhang above the entrance. concrete, cast in a single piece, roughly 2.5 meters wide. The diagonal crack, from upper left toward center right, consistent across all 6 accounts. Angle and starting point matching within what Daniela called the margin of human memory error. The entrance door, glass-paneled wooden frame, handle on the right, the glass slightly distorted, old cheap glass that bends light imperceptibly. Always unlocked. Inside, immediate left turn into a stairwell. Stone steps, not wood, wide enough for 2 people. An iron handrail on the right side, slightly loose at the second landing. The broken light, not absent, not flickering, just light, and then the absence of light, with no transition. The corridor, long, with a geometric patterned runner, heavily worn through the center, a color somewhere between burgundy and brown. Doors on both sides, evenly spaced. No nameplates. No numbers anyone could read clearly. At the far end of the corridor, one door, different from the others, slightly wider, white paint. The handle on the left side rather than the right, warm to the touch, according to Cora, the only one who had ever reached it. The smell throughout, damp newspaper, and beneath it, something almost sweet. Daniela had not allowed the 6 to speak with each other before recording all the testimonies separately. She wanted the comparison to happen with witnesses, including herself. When Ryan shared the sketches on the group call, the reaction was immediate and unperformed. Marcus, the most skeptical of them all, went silent for nearly a minute. Joel said, in his measured voice, "That's the overhang." Agnieszka said, "The crack goes left to right. It starts higher up." Ryan said, "Upper left corner." "That's right. I always got that right." Priya asked, "The carpet in the corridor, what color is it?" One by one, they described it. Burgundy going to brown, worn through the center. Cora said, very quietly, "Has anyone touched the door at the end?" The answer from everyone, except her, was no. She said, "It was warm." Nobody laughed. Nobody expressed skepticism. Daniela noted in her research log that this was the moment she understood, with clinical certainty, that what was happening had no existing framework capable of containing it. Daniela spent 11 months trying to locate the building. The search began logically. She cross-referenced the described details against property records, urban planning documents, and historical photographs from the cities where each participant had grown up or lived when the memory first appeared. Nothing matched. She widened the search geographically. She hired a research assistant in each of the relevant countries to comb through regional archives, newspaper records, and demolition filings for buildings matching the description. 2 of these searches produced partial matches. The first was a building in Lodz, Poland, a residential block from the 1960s demolished in 2004. Photographs showed a cream-colored exterior. The overhang wasn't visible in any of the available images. Agnieszka studied the photographs for a long time and then said, "The scale is wrong. The windows are too close together." The second was more unsettling. A property researcher in Birmingham found records of a building on a street called Mercer Lane, demolished in 1989 following a structural survey. The address no longer existed. The street itself had been absorbed into a retail development. The demolition record included one photograph, a wide shot of the facade, cream-colored render, a concrete overhang, a diagonal crack, visible even at that resolution, from the upper left corner toward the center right. Joel was shown the photograph. He stared at it for a long time. "It's not right," he said. "The entrance is on the left. In the one I know, the entrance is centered. But the crack was there. The crack was there." 14 months into the research, Daniela received an email from Ryan. He had done something he now described as a mistake. He had rendered the building in 3D modeling software, not sketched it, rendered it, using all the details from the consensus description. He thought making it concrete, external, fully visible, would help him finally close the door on it, get it out and move on. He shared the render with the group. Everyone confirmed. That's it. That's the building. 2 weeks after posting the file online as part of his thesis project, Ryan received a message from a stranger who had found the work. The message read, "I know this building. I used to walk past it every day. It was on Mella Street." Ryan forwarded the message to Daniela. She replied within an hour, asking for the sender's contact information. The sender's name was Tomás. He was 61 years old. He lived in Montevideo, Uruguay. He said he remembered the building from his childhood, from a neighborhood in the city where he had grown up. He said it had been demolished sometime in the 1970s, when he was under 10 years old. His father had been an amateur photographer, and there was a single photograph of the street, with the building visible in the background. He sent the photograph. Cream-colored facade, 4 floors, concrete overhang above a centered entrance. The crack wasn't visible at that scale, but Daniela enlarged it as far as the resolution would allow. The glass in the entrance door was slightly distorted. Daniela called Tomás several times. He was generous, attentive, clearly moved to have found someone who cared about this fragment of his childhood. In their third conversation, he mentioned something she hadn't asked about. He said that as a child he had gone inside the building once, briefly, while playing in the area with other boys. He remembered the stairwell, climbing to the second floor and noticing the light was out. He remembered the smell. He searched for the word in English, his second language, and found it, sweet, like fruit left out too long. He had never gone past the second floor, but he said, and he apologized as he said it, because he understood how it sounded, that while he was in the stairwell, standing in the darkness above the second landing, he had looked up, and he had seen, at the top of the stairs, a door. Not the door at the end of the corridor. A door above. A door that wasn't on any floor he could count. And there was light coming through the gap at the bottom. Warm, steady light. And he had heard, very faintly, and here he apologized again. He had heard what sounded like voices. People talking. He ran. Daniela never published the research. She withdrew from her doctorate in late 2023. The 6 participants still speak to each other, occasionally. They don't discuss the building much anymore. There's a shared understanding, unspoken, that they have learned everything about it they are going to learn. What remains is what remains. Ryan deleted the 3D render from his project files. He never explained why. He still has the sketches. In the last conversation Daniela had with Cora, she asked if there was anything she hadn't shared yet. Cora was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "After I found out about Tomás, I went back. In my mind, I went through the whole building. I went to the door at the end of the corridor. I put my hand on it. Was it still warm?" Daniela asked. "Yes," Cora said. "Warmer than before." The building on Mella Street has no confirmed address. It appears in no city registry, no planning archive, no verified historical record. The photograph taken by Tomás's father is the only physical evidence that anything matching its description ever existed. In 2024, Daniela sent the photograph to 3 independent architectural historians, asking if they could identify the city from contextual details in the image. None of them could. But one of them replied with a follow-up question. She said she had shown the photograph to her assistant. Her assistant recognized the building. She had dreamed of it her entire life.